Hi everyone, Layla here with Stillville TV and welcome back to our channel. In today's video, I will be teaching you how to speak and sound like a native speaker. So specifically in today's video, I will be sharing some practical tips on how to sound more fluent in English. So English is my fourth language, and just like everyone else, I started with the basic level. However, my eye has always been on the goal of speaking English fluently and flawlessly, as if I grew up speaking English my whole life. So I hope that today's video helps you embody some of the characteristics and skills that native speakers have. Tip number 1, get familiar with different accents. So as a lot of you know, there are many different types of accents among English speakers. There's the American accent, there's the British accent, there's the Australian accent. Also, someone from New York may not have the same accent as someone from California. And so the question is, what kind of accent do you want to have? I had decided for myself when I was in 9th grade that I wanted to have an American accent. This decision had a lot to do with the scholarship programs that I was applying for in the US. Therefore, think about the countries and the cities that you would like to travel to and work in before you pick the right accent for yourself. This is a very important point to decide, as it will make your entire experience abroad more focused. And so, for example, if you are pursuing a job opportunity in the US and you want to sound like a New Yorker, then you should be watching Friends in the meantime. So picking the right accent for ourselves is the first step. So it is important to make this decision before we proceed to my next tip. So the best way of learning how to sound more native is to imitate native pronunciation. Okay, so you now have some basic knowledge on different English accents. So how do you actually go about imitating native pronunciation? One great place to start is imitating native speakers by watching movies or YouTube videos. So this will expose you to different English pronunciation and speaking styles. This is why picking the right accent for yourself was the first step to begin with. So while you are watching and closely studying these Netflix and YouTube shows, you have to pay attention to the speaker's lips and mouth movements. What you can do next is you can write down some sentences out of these shows, and then you can try and imitate them in front of the mirror. The key is to do it over and over again until it becomes muscle memory. What I personally recommend is recording yourself either on the phone or on your camera and then listening to yourself over and over again to hear your own mistakes and to correct your own mistakes. And so you can record yourself pronouncing different sentences over and over again and assess your progress by listening to yourself. So my next tip in becoming more fluent in English is to learn the flow of English. So although pronunciation is important, picking the right accent for yourself is important, it is not everything. What this means is you can try and imitate native speakers and you can pronounce every single word like a native speaker, but you still might not talk like one. And that's because you also need to have the right flow. And so what exactly makes the flow of English? One important element is connected speech. And so this refers to the way the end of one word and the beginning of the next one interact with each other. So specifically what native speakers do is they join two sounds. For example, when one word ends with a consonant sound and the next word begins with the same sound, native speakers usually join these two sounds. For example, I decided later. I'd do it later. So instead of saying I'd decide it later, native speakers say I decided later. I do it later. Another specific example of what native speakers do is they link to sounds. For example, if the first word ends with a consonant and the next word begins with a vowel, they will link these two sounds. I'd like a fried egg, please. And so instead of saying I'd like a fried egg, please, native speakers will say I'd like a fried egg, please. So they'll link those two sounds. Another specific examples of what native speakers do is they eliminate a sound. They get rid of a sound. For example, see you next week. See you next week. So instead of saying see you next week, native speakers will say see you next week. Another specific thing that native speakers do is use contractions. Native speakers almost always use contractions. For example, I am becomes I'm. I will becomes I'll. Do not becomes don't. I have becomes I've. I would becomes I'd. There are also words that you will never learn in an English classroom. However, native speakers use contractions such as gotta instead of got to. For example, I gotta go. Shoulda instead of should have. So instead of saying I should have done that, native speakers will say I should have done that. Gonna instead of going to. I'm gonna do it tomorrow. I'm gonna go there tomorrow. Wanna instead of want to. I kind of want to do it now. I kind of want to go there now. What you doing instead of what are you doing? So for example, instead of asking what are you doing tonight, native speakers will say what you doing tonight? What you doing tonight? So my next tip on sounding more native is using slang, but make sure that you only use slang in non-formal situations. So slang refers to non-formal language, and it appears more in speaking than in writing. For example, hang out is a slang. So instead of saying, would you like to spend some more time together this weekend? You can say, would you like to hang out some more this weekend? Would you like to hang out this weekend? Would you like to hang out tonight? Or instead of saying, I had a lot of fun last night, you can say, I had a blast last night. Or instead of saying that something or someone irritated you, you can say something or someone drove you up the wall. So, all right, so my next tip for sounding like a native speaker is to use idioms. So English idioms are basically phrases the meanings of which are not obvious from the meaning of the individual words. So basically, an idiom is a form of speech that should not be taken literally. For example, she's an early bird, which means she wakes up early. Or seeing eye to eye means to agree on something. So if someone says, when pigs fly, they're referring to something that will never happen. Or once in a blue moon means something that happens very rarely. You could say a piece of cake for something that's very easy. Or you could say, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather to express that you're not feeling well. My next tip is about using phrasal verbs. So phrasal verbs are a combination of a verb and an adverb. For example, I just got an email that they called off tomorrow's meeting. Call off here means cancel. I think that this presentation needs a do-over. A do-over here means change. Or if someone calls you and says, can we please talk this over? What they're trying to say is they want to discuss it with you. So another thing that native speakers do is they love to exaggerate. So to sound more like a native speaker, you have to learn how to exaggerate correctly. For example, it's so hot outside, I am melting. Or it's so cold outside, I am freezing. Or I was so happy I could burst. So another tip on sounding more like a native speaker is to use a double negative. For example, instead of saying that's not possible, native speakers will often say, that's not impossible. Another thing that native speakers will say is, for example, ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. I use this one a lot. My next tip on sounding more like a native speaker is to cut off some words. For example, instead of saying it was great talking to you, native speakers will say great talking to you. Instead of saying it was great meeting you, native speakers will say great meeting you. And instead of saying it was an awesome speech, they'll say awesome speech. And my last tip on sounding more like a native speaker is to start using natural sounding fillers. For example, before you start telling your story, you could say, by the way. When you're listening to someone speak, you could say, yeah. Or before you start your sentence, you could say, well. You could also use the word okay a lot, like as you're listening to someone, you could say, okay. You could use you see as a sentence opener before you jump onto your story. To be honest is another good natural sounding filler. And you know. I am notorious for using you know with my friends. I use it all the time together with like and actually. Actually, that's not how it was. So I am notorious for using these, but I do recommend using these because they are overused in English by native speakers as well. So they will make you sound more natural and more conversational. My other tip will be using casual greetings. For example, native speakers will often say, "What's up? How's it going? How's everything?" So instead of the formal, "How are you?" native speakers will say, "What's up? How's it going? How's everything?" And a good response for those questions could be, "I'm great. Thanks for asking." Native speakers also love shortening the words. For example, instead of saying congratulations, they will say congrats. Instead of saying thank you, they will say thanks. So learning always requires an input and an output. And now that you've learned all these tips and tricks on how to sound more like a native speaker, you have to put in the work. So I do recommend developing a habit of speaking to native speakers on a daily basis. However, if you don't have access to native speakers in the country where you live, I do recommend registering on Dilbil.com and signing up for our conversation classes. So if you join a conversation club at Dilbil.com, you'll be able to speak to native speakers 3 times a week for an hour each. Not only do our teachers teach you vocabulary and speaking skills, they also help you improve your accent and sound more like a native speaker. And remember, keep speaking and practicing, and I hope to see you guys in my next video. Good luck!